In the winter of 1947, in a remote corner of the Romanian Carpathians, something happened that would challenge everything we thought we knew about medicine, reality, and the thin veil between science and the supernatural. The locals called him Doctorul de Luminac, the Light Doctor, but his real name was Dr. Alexandru Vasilescu, and what witnesses claimed to see in his makeshift operating theatre would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Imagine, if you will, walking into a dimly lit room and seeing a man performing surgery with instruments that weren't there, not invisible, but made of pure, radiant light that seemed to cut through flesh like butter while simultaneously healing the very wounds they created. Witnesses swore they saw luminous scalpels that left no scars, forceps made of starlight that could grasp organs without causing damage, and sutures of crystalline energy that dissolved once their work was done. But this isn't just another medical mystery. This is a story about obsession, about a brilliant mind that crossed lines that should never be crossed, and about the horrific price that was paid when science collided with forces beyond human comprehension. Dr. Alexandru Vasilescu wasn't always the man who would become known as the Light Doctor. Born in Bucharest in 1898, he was considered a prodigy from an early age. By the time he was 25, he had already earned degrees in medicine, physics, and what we would now call biology. His colleagues described him as brilliant but obsessed with what he called the fundamental frequency of healing. Vasilescu believed that every disease, every injury, every malformation of the human body had a specific vibrational signature, and if you could match that signature with its opposite frequency, you could theoretically cancel out the disease entirely. It sounds almost reasonable when you put it that way, doesn't it? But Vasilescu's research would take him down a path that would make him question the very nature of reality itself. In 1923, while working at the University Hospital in Bucharest, Vasilescu began conducting unauthorized experiments with what he called photonic surgery, using a combination of focused light beams, electromagnetic fields, and principles borrowed from quantum physics that wouldn't be fully understood for decades. He claimed to have developed surgical instruments made entirely of controlled light energy. His first successful procedure, according to his own notes, was the removal of a tumor from a young woman's brain. But here's where the story becomes truly disturbing. The woman, Maria Ionescu, later described the operation to other patients in terms that defied medical explanation. She claimed that she remained conscious throughout the entire procedure, feeling no pain, and that she could see the doctor's hands moving through her skull as if it were made of water. More disturbing still, she said the instruments seemed to have a consciousness of their own. The light scalpel, she claimed, would hesitate before making certain cuts, as if it were considering the consequences. The forceps would gently caress healthy tissue while aggressively attacking diseased cells. It was as if the light itself could distinguish between what should live and what should die. Word of Vasilescu's impossible surgeries began to spread through the medical community like wildfire. Some dismissed the accounts as hallucinations brought on by experimental anesthetics. Others suspected elaborate stage magic designed to boost the doctor's reputation. But a small group of physicians began to take notice of something truly unsettling. Vasilescu's success rate was 100%, not 99%, not even 99.9%. Every single patient who underwent his photonic surgery recovered completely, often from conditions that should have been terminal. Brain tumors vanished without a trace. Severed spinal cords reconnected perfectly. Hearts with congenital defects restructured themselves into perfect working order. By 1928, Vasilescu had attracted the attention of the Romanian government, who secretly funded his research in exchange for exclusive access to his techniques. This is where our story takes its first truly dark turn, because the government wasn't interested in Vasilescu's healing abilities, they were interested in his potential as a weapon. Military documents declassified in 1992 reveal that Vasilescu was asked to reverse engineer his healing light to create instruments of pure energy that could destroy rather than repair. The project was codenamed Sabia Lumini, the Sword of Light. And according to these documents, Vasilescu not only accepted the assignment, but seemed to relish the challenge. The first successful test of the weaponized light occurred in a remote facility in the Carpathian Mountains in 1931. The subject was a political prisoner whose name has been redacted from all official records. Witnesses described watching as Vasilescu, now wearing strange protective eyewear that seemed to glow with an inner light, used his photonic instruments to systematically dismantle the prisoner's body from the inside out. But here's what makes this account so chilling. The prisoner remained conscious and coherent throughout the entire ordeal. The light instruments, it seemed, could destroy tissue, while simultaneously preventing the body from going into shock or losing consciousness. The victim was forced to experience every moment of their own systematic destruction. The prisoner's screams, according to one witness account, didn't sound entirely human. They described a quality to the cries that seemed to resonate at frequencies that made nearby glass crack and metal objects vibrate. It was as if the light instruments weren't just destroying the body, but were somehow affecting the very essence of what made the person human. Word of these experiments eventually reached the ears of certain occult societies that were gaining power in Germany during the 1930s. Representatives of the Ahnenerbe, the Nazi research organization dedicated to studying supernatural phenomena, approached Vasilescu in 1938 with an offer he couldn't refuse: unlimited funding and test subjects in exchange for sharing his photonic technology. Vasilescu accepted, and this decision would transform him from a brilliant but misguided doctor into something far more sinister. The Nazi records, discovered after the war, describe experiments that push the boundaries of human comprehension. Vasilescu didn't just use his light instruments to harm his subjects. He began using them to fundamentally alter what they were. According to these documents, Vasilescu claimed that his photonic instruments could manipulate what he called the quantum substrate of consciousness. In layman's terms, he believed he could edit a person's soul the same way a surgeon might remove a tumor. He could extract memories, transplant personalities, and even graft portions of one person's consciousness onto another. The most disturbing account comes from a surviving witness, a camp prisoner named Heinrich Müller, who somehow escaped the facility where Vasilescu conducted his final experiments. Müller's testimony, given to Allied investigators in 1946, describes procedures that sound more like demonic possession than medical treatment. Müller claimed to have seen Vasilescu use his light instruments to extract what looked like glowing, writhing forms from his victims' bodies. These entities, which Müller described as being made of the same luminous energy as the surgical instruments, would be transferred into other subjects, creating hybrid beings that were neither fully one person nor another. The transferred consciousness fragments would fight for control within their new hosts, creating individuals who would speak in multiple voices, display contradictory personality traits, and sometimes perform actions that were completely at odds with their apparent intentions. Müller described watching as a subject who had received consciousness fragments from 3 different victims, simultaneously tried to walk in 3 different directions, tearing muscles and breaking bones in the process. But the most horrifying detail in Müller's testimony concerns what happened to Vasilescu himself. According to Müller, the doctor had begun experimenting on his own consciousness, using his photonic instruments to enhance his mental capabilities. By 1944, Vasilescu was no longer entirely human. Müller described the doctor as being able to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. His consciousness spread across several different manifestations of his physical form. Each version of Vasilescu retained the same memories and personality, but could operate independently. It was as if he had learned to photocopy his own soul. This multiplication of consciousness came with a terrible price. Müller claimed that the various versions of Vasilescu were not perfect copies of each other. Small errors in the consciousness transfer process had accumulated over time, creating subtle but disturbing differences between each manifestation. Some versions were more aggressive than others. Some retained different memories, and some seemed to have picked up fragments of consciousness from his previous victims. As the war drew to a close and Soviet forces approached the facility where Vasilescu was conducting his experiments, something unprecedented occurred. According to the final Nazi reports, all manifestations of Vasilescu simply vanished simultaneously. Not fled, not died, not being captured, they simply ceased to exist, along with all of his photonic surgical instruments. The facility was found completely empty, except for a single room that glowed with a faint pulsing light that persisted for several weeks after the liberation. Soviet investigators reported that any electronic equipment brought into this room would malfunction, and several personnel experienced vivid hallucinations of undergoing surgical procedures performed by invisible hands. But Vasilescu's story doesn't end with his mysterious disappearance. In the decades following the war, reports began to emerge from around the world of a doctor who operated with instruments made of pure light. The descriptions were always the same: a tall, thin man with prematurely white hair and eyes that seemed to glow with an inner radiance, performing impossible surgeries with tools that existed only as controlled beams of light. These sightings followed a disturbing pattern. The Light Doctor would appear in areas devastated by war, famine, or natural disaster, offering to heal the wounded and dying. His surgeries were always successful, his patients always recovered completely, and he never asked for payment. But there was always a price to be paid. In 1953, following reports of miraculous healings in a Korean War field hospital, military investigators discovered that every patient treated by the mysterious doctor had experienced the same side effect. They had lost the ability to dream. Not just nightmares or disturbing dreams, they had lost the capacity to dream entirely. Sleep studies revealed that these patients' brains showed no REM activity whatsoever. Even more disturbing was what happened to these patients over time. Without dreams to process their experiences and emotions, they began to lose the ability to form new memories properly. They could remember everything that happened to them before their encounter with the Light Doctor, but new experiences seemed to slip away like water through their fingers. Similar patterns emerged from other sightings. Patients in Vietnam who were treated by the Light Doctor in 1968 were found to have lost their ability to feel physical pain. While this might seem like a blessing for wounded soldiers, the inability to feel pain proved devastating. Without pain to warn them of injury or illness, many of these patients died from conditions that should have been easily treatable. In 1974, earthquake victims in Guatemala who were healed by the Light Doctor lost their ability to feel fear. They would walk into dangerous situations with no sense of self-preservation, leading to a mortality rate that was actually higher than the general population. Each encounter with the Light Doctor seemed to extract a different aspect of human experience in exchange for physical healing. Some patients lost their ability to feel love, others their capacity for empathy. Some could no longer experience joy, while others found themselves unable to grieve even the most devastating losses. By the 1980s, a pattern had emerged that suggested these weren't random side effects, but rather deliberate extractions. It appeared that Vasilescu, or whatever he had become, was systematically harvesting human experiences and emotions, possibly to fuel his own continued existence. The most recent confirmed sighting of the Light Doctor occurred in 1994, in a refugee camp in Rwanda. Survivors describe a man matching Vasilescu's description who arrived during the height of the genocide, offering to heal the wounded. Those who accepted his treatment recovered from their physical injuries but reportedly lost their ability to distinguish between different faces. They could see people clearly, but every human face looked identical to them, making it impossible to recognize friends, family, or even their own reflection. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of these modern sightings is that witnesses report the Light Doctor no longer appears to age. Descriptions from the 1950s through the 1990s all describe the same man, apparently frozen at around 50 years of age. It's as if his experiments with consciousness transfer had somehow removed him from the normal flow of time. Some researchers have theorized that Vasilescu discovered a way to sustain himself by feeding on human experiences, extracting specific aspects of consciousness from his patients to maintain his own existence. Others believe that he became trapped between multiple versions of himself, unable to exist fully in any single reality. There are those who claim that the Light Doctor continues to operate today, moving through war zones and disaster areas, offering impossible healing in exchange for pieces of what makes us human. They say he can be recognized not just by his luminous surgical instruments, but by the strange quality of light that seems to follow him wherever he goes. The story of Dr. Alexandru Vasilescu serves as a chilling reminder that some boundaries exist for good reason. In his quest to master the fundamental forces of healing, he may have discovered something far more dangerous than any disease: the ability to edit human consciousness itself. Whether the Light Doctor was a brilliant scientist who pushed too far into unknown territory, or something else entirely that learned to wear the shape of a healer, we may never know. What we do know is that somewhere in the shadows between science and the supernatural, between healing and horror, the consequences of his choices continue to ripple through our world. The next time you hear stories of miraculous healings, of doctors who can perform impossible surgeries with impossible tools, remember the price that was paid for such knowledge. Remember that some gifts come with costs that aren't immediately apparent, and that the most dangerous monsters are often those who approach us offering to help. Because according to the witnesses who survived their encounters with the Light Doctor, the most terrifying thing wasn't what he took from them. It was the realization that he had been taking these pieces of human experience and using them to become something that was no longer bound by the laws that govern the rest of us. And if the reports are true, if Vasilescu is still out there, still offering his luminous healing to those desperate enough to accept it, then his greatest experiment may not be complete. He may still be working toward some ultimate goal that requires him to collect every possible human experience, every emotion, every dream. The question that should keep us all awake at night is this: what happens when he finally has enough? What will Alexandru Vasilescu become when he has harvested every aspect of human consciousness that exists? And more importantly, will there be enough of humanity left to recognize the monster we allowed him to become? Sweet dreams.